Hey everyone, welcome to this episode with Keith Frankish. Keith is a philosopher, best known for his work on Illusionism, a theory on consciousness, and he's also the co-host of the popular podcast Mind Chat, which he runs with the other philosopher Philip Goff. I hope you enjoy our conversation today. We spoke about Keith's career, his life, and also talked a little bit about Illusionism. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe, as it really helps this show, given that we're new. But yeah, I hope you enjoy, and thank you for watching. Keith, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, Joe.
So Keith, I know that you were born in a village near Doncaster. What was it like growing up there when you were younger?
Not too exciting. I had quite a secure childhood, loving family, very supportive parents, but the location wasn't one that really excited me very much. A very flat area, there wasn't a lot to do. Farming area, still a coal mining area when I was a child. The one thing that I really liked and that I remember with great affection was playing cricket. My father played cricket for the local team, and we travelled around to local cricket grounds. And these weekends spent on cricket grounds were some of the happiest times of my childhood, indeed of my life. And that gave me a love of cricket. Also, I think a sense of the community of the players and the families, which I still keep in touch with those people. I still, when I go back to the village now, I still go down to the village ground and meet those people, well, now it's their grandchildren who are playing in the team. That was a really sort of safe and happy focus for my childhood. Other than that, I didn't particularly enjoy school, and I didn't enjoy the general atmosphere of the place. I think I still go back there. I still have my mother still lives there, and I still have friends there. But it's not a place I look back on with great affection, I'm afraid. Apart from the cricket community.
I know that unfortunately some of your education was interrupted for a few years because you fell a bit ill when you were a teenager, but you did end up going to the Open University to do a degree in arts. What led you to choose this subject?
Well, what happened was I was quite seriously ill for some time, and this really disrupted my secondary education. And so I spent a lot of time educating myself, really. I wasn't able to do much other than read. And so I did a lot of reading. I'd always been a quite curious person. I always enjoyed learning. I always enjoyed asking questions. Not sure other people enjoyed hearing me ask questions, but I enjoyed asking them, trying to find out things. So when I had this time where I couldn't do much else, I did a lot of reading. There were a series like the Penguin Classics and the Penguin English Library. I love those books. I went through all the classic literature, really classic Western literature, anyway, from Greece and Rome through to the English literature, 19th century novels, modern literature, and also philosophy. I started reading philosophy then. And I just read a lot of stuff, rather in a rather unplanned and way. If I heard that something was important or was a classic, then I would read it in this classic autodidact way. Now, so when I did go back into education then, and I started first by doing an Open University degree, I'd already got a lot of interests and a lot of knowledge in a rather unorganized form, and I didn't really have a clue where I could go. I I was very interested in ancient history, in ancient Greece and Rome. I was very interested in literature. I was very interested in Shakespeare. I can, if people let me, I will still recite bits of Shakespeare to them. I love Shakespeare. Um, I was also interested in philosophy, of course, and I'd read quite a lot of psychology too. So I didn't really know what I was going to do. And this studying with the Open University was in a way the ideal thing, because you didn't have to choose a degree program. The degrees were completely modularized. And so you could put together pretty much any combination of courses you wanted. Um, I was, uh, I knew I wanted to do an arts degree, but I did a lot of different courses in the sort of subjects I've just mentioned: ancient history, literature, Shakespeare. I did all the philosophy courses I could, including a absolutely terrific course called Reason and Experience on early modern philosophy. It's quite a famous course, I think, with the people who've encountered it. It was a brilliant introduction to early modern philosophy, the rationalist tradition and the empiricist tradition. So I did that. I also did some courses on history, religion, the history of religion. And what this enabled me to do, I think, was to explore all the different interests I'd formed and see which of them I was most excited by. And I was pretty clear by the time I'd finished that degree that it was philosophy I wanted to do. That was the one that really, really gripped me, the one that I felt, I felt like I couldn't leave it, I think. I think that's the thing. If I'd been told I couldn't do any more philosophy, I'd been very upset. So when I went on to do postgraduate work, it was philosophy that I did. And I went to Sheffield then, which had a very strong philosophy department, still does have a very strong philosophy department. This was in the early 90s, to study for an MA and then later for a PhD there.
What do you think it was about philosophy as opposed to the other arts that really gripped you and you went on to eventually do at Sheffield?
That's a good question, and I don't really know. I think here's something I often say about that, and I don't know whether it's true, but it sort of makes sense. I've always been quite an anxious person. I was anxious as a child, anxious not just about personal things, but anxious about understanding things. If I didn't understand something, it bothered me. I mean, here's a little story that I sometimes tell. When I was at primary school, I was learning how to do fractions. And the teacher said, look, if you learn how to multiply fractions, and then she said, now, if you want to divide one fraction by another, you turn the second one upside down and multiply. Just do it simple. And I said, oh, yeah, right, I understand. Why do you do that? And she said, it doesn't matter why you do it, you just do it and you'll get the right answer. And so I did the exercise like that and I got the right answer. And so I said, but why? Why do you turn the second one upside down rather than the first? Why do you multiply rather than doing something else? Why does it work? She said, I don't know why it works. It just works. And this bothered me. I wasn't happy using this technique if I didn't understand it. And so it kind of nagged at me all that day. And we were playing football in the afternoon, I think, at school. It was games. And all the time I was thinking about this. And when I came home, I was dirty from playing football, and my mother said to me, go and get washed, go and get a bath, you're dirty. And so I went upstairs and I was still thinking about this thing. And I got in the bath, and I was sitting on and I had this sort of Archimedes moment in the bath where I was thinking about it, and I suddenly realized why it worked. I satisfied myself as to why this procedure worked. I understood the rationale behind it. And I sort of had this eureka moment in the bath where I worked out why you turn the second fraction upside down and multiply. And I felt so pleased that I'd sorted this out. And now I like to think maybe that's that sort of anxiety about understanding that lies behind a lot of philosophy, that philosophers aren't content with the routine explanation or the routine instructions about how to do things. They want to ask, yes, but why? They don't just want to know what causes what. They want to know what causation is. They don't want to know what time things happen. They want to know what time itself is. They don't just want to know what people think and so on. They want to know what thinking itself is. It's this asking questions that most people take for granted. This is a kind of a nice little sort of just so story. But it does, I think, reflect something about me and also something about the discipline of philosophy. It's inquiring into the things that most people take for granted, perhaps wisely take for granted. So maybe that was one of the reasons that I found it satisfying, this anxiety in myself to get to the bottom of things. And of course, if there's one thing more than any that puzzles everyone, I think it's with their own minds. I mean, minds are amazing, strange things that seem to be our immediate reality, the thing we know best. Yet they're also deeply, deeply puzzling, and they're also connected to this astonishingly complex organ, the brain, this complex structure that we know of in the universe, and how uh, the mind is related to the brain, how the brain produces or is the mind. I said, this is one of the deepest and most, if you like, anxiety-provoking questions there is. So I think it was fairly natural that I'd gravitate to that.
It's a great story about the maths lesson. You clearly were a philosopher from a young age then.
Perfectly true story.
As you said, you went to Sheffield. I saw online that when you did your masters at Sheffield, your thesis was on some of Daniel Dennett's work, and I know that you say you're a bit of a disciple of Dennett. Was this where your interest in his work began then?
Not quite at Sheffield. Even before that, I'd read his book Consciousness Explained. As soon as it came out I think it was 1991, and immediately it had gripped me. Immediately I thought that here was somebody who was doing what the great philosophers of past generations had done, that seeing the big picture, seeing how things really fitted together here, instead of, as a lot of modern philosophies seem to be doing, getting bogged down in a lot of technical details. And after all, when it comes to the mind, you really do need to take a broad perspective to understand how things fit together. And I thought this guy's, I didn't really know who he was at the time. I thought this guy's onto something here. And I've read the books many times since then, and each time that feeling has been confirmed and deepened. I've seen more in it every time. So when I went to Sheffield, Dennett was already a presence in my philosophical sort of landscape, and what I wrote my MA dissertation on was not about Dennett's views on consciousness. It was about a distinction he made between two kinds of belief, between belief and what he called opinion. And he hasn't written a great deal about this. He published a paper on it back in 1978, quite a short paper, and he's mentioned this distinction in various places. And it seemed to me that it was really important distinction, really onto something very important. And so I thought, there's something here that I can develop and build on. And that's what I did. And I started doing with my MA dissertation, then did later with my PhD, and indeed, it was my first book came out of that project. And so this is one of the great things I think about Dennett and about the best philosophers. They don't just have a complete theory of something all worked out and nailed down. They have insights. They latch on to important things, and sometimes they don't follow these insights through completely, but they're like a mine where you can go and extract bits of gold, and you can, maybe that metaphor doesn't quite work, but they're a great source of inspiration and suggestions and ideas, and they're pointing you in interesting and fruitful directions. And those are the philosophers you want to read. Not the philosophers who give you the impression, I've nailed all this down, I've sorted it all out, this is the answer, just listen to me and I've got it. No. And Dennett's not like that. Dennett is a what's the word? Fertile sort of philosopher who sows ideas in people's minds, and that's one among many reasons why I'm so fond of his work.
You stayed there to do your PhD as well then. What was your research on for your PhD thesis?
Well, there was a debate, I suppose it's still going on, about the nature of what philosophers call folk psychology. By this, they don't mean sort of Reader's Digest ideas about psychology. What they mean is the very basic way we have of explaining and predicting people's behavior, namely by talking about what people think and what they want. And we explain why somebody arrived for a meeting at a certain time by saying that they believed they had this appointment and they wanted to keep it. And that seems a perfectly good explanation of why they were there. And it's very difficult to give an explanation, say, in neurological, in neuro scientific terms of why they were there. So this folk psychological way of explaining each other's behavior and predicting each other's behavior seems quite indispensable to us. But is it? There was a big debate about the nature of this theory. Is it actually a proto-scientific theory? Are these the notions of belief and desire and thought and other similar folk notions such as emotion, for example? Are these notions that a scientific psychology will use, or are they just something like everyday are these principles, these psychological principles that we use to explain people, are they just rules of thumb? And these descriptions of people as believing things and wanting things, are they just rough and ready everyday descriptions that kind of do some work in coordinating our activities, but don't really get at anything that a science of the mind would want to use? Will a science of the mind actually use different concepts and different principles drawn, say, from neuroscience, and will eventually cast aside this everyday explanatory framework? So that was a debate that was going on, and it seemed to me that the people in this debate were missing something, which was that when we talk about belief and people believing things, there's more than one thing we mean by that. Sometimes we're talking about one kind of attitude, and sometimes we're talking about a rather different sort of attitude. And this was what Dennett was pointing at with his distinction between belief and opinion. Put it very simply, belief is something that's manifest in your behavior. So we can talk about somebody, we can say that somebody believes something on the basis of just observing their behavior. And we talk about animals believing things. You can see my cat believes that the food is in the kitchen because it's scratching at the kitchen door, say, or whatever. Whereas opinion is a more explicit kind of state that's usually, if not always, articulated in language. And so I can have beliefs with contents that are very specific. Dennett has an example of where, I can't remember what it was, where a particular author was born, in which city a particular author was born. It's hard to see how you could have that belief without having language to articulate it. And so you have these structured linguistic states that you explicitly formulate to yourself and to other people. And then you have this more behavioral form of belief that's manifest in the way you act in the world. And I thought that making this distinction, making it more clarifying it and developing it more carefully was going to be very important to this debate about the role of folk psychology, because there are different kinds of explanatory practices and predictive practices associated with these two different kinds of belief. And so I spent a lot of time trying to sort this out and provide an account of a more precise account of what these two sorts of belief were and how they're related to each other and what role they played in behavior and their relation to things like consciousness and so on. And I wrote my PhD thesis on that, and then my first book was on that. which I called, I think now, rather foolishly, I called it mind and supermind, because the idea was that these two kinds of belief form something like two levels of mentality, one of which is, it were, constructed on the back of the other. You can you need to have this rich basis of the behavioral kind of belief, the mind, to be able to construct this more explicit level of what I call the supermind. It sounds a little bit. Supermind sounds, it might be something paranormal, of course, which is the last thing I intended. But I had this two-level picture of the human mind, and I traced it out in some detail in that book, and I still think that the picture I got there was pretty much right. I still like it, and I've gone off in other directions and worked a lot on consciousness, but I would at some point like to come back to that and try and represent those ideas, because I still think there's a lot in them.
That's really interesting. There's another thing at Sheffield as well, as well as your MA and PhD. I believe you met your wife Maria there.
That's right, yep.
I wanted to ask, what is a marriage between two philosophers like?
Oh, I suppose it depends on who on every individual philosopher. I don't think I couldn't generalize. Maria is a unique person, a very special person, and as anyone who knows her will tell you. So I don't think I can generalize from her qualities to other people. One thing that, well, I think in our case, we are both actually, we're both genuinely interested and excited by philosophical ideas, and we've collaborated on a couple of things in the past. And this is one of the things. It's the opposite of a source of friction in a marriage. We both enjoy philosophy very much, and it's one way we can really instead of watching Netflix or something, we do enjoy sitting talking about philosophy, which sounds awful, but it's a common passion, and I think we both read each other's work, we comment on each other's work. I think we've both helped each other in different ways with our work. Maybe really, it's another philosopher is the only person to whom it would be fair for a philosopher to get married, because a philosopher's interests are somewhat peculiar and can be a bit consuming, and it probably takes another philosopher to understand that. It probably goes for anybody who's got well, I don't want to over dramatize a bit, but an obsession. It helps to be with someone who shares that obsession, just so that they understand it and don't get too annoyed by it.
Sounds like a good team then.
It's a great team, yes.
So after Sheffield, well, I mean, I know you live and work in Crete now, but after Sheffield, you worked at Sheffield for a bit, and then I think you're at the Open University and at Cambridge. Can you detail that path a little bit, where you were in between there and now?
Yes, well, I had some temporary positions at Sheffield, and then I was applying for junior research fellowships at Oxford and Cambridge. But while I was doing that, I got a job, a permanent post, with the Open University in Milton Keynes, which was a job as what's called a central academic. So I went back to the Open University as a lecturer, and central academics. The university has a distributed structure. So there are the central academics in Milton Keynes who produce the courses, who write the courses and prepare the courses and prepare the course material, the exams and so on. And then there's this distributed network of associate lecturers who teach the material to groups in their area. So I was a central academic, and my job was writing course material primarily. And I think it was an excellent training. for what I've gone on to do, because we wrote in teams, in course teams, and everybody's work was subjected to criticism by other members of the team. Everything was read and pulled apart by the team members. It was pretty it could be pretty hard at first getting used to this. But it was a great training in writing accessibly, because that's what it was all about. The criticism wasn't primarily about the academic quality of what you were writing. It was taken that you were writing on something you knew about, but it was about the accessibility of it, whether it would work for the students, because the university has a wide range of students, a wide range of backgrounds, and it's important that that material is presented in a way that will work for as many as possible. So you need to get it right, but you also need to get it clear, and you need to get it. You need to provide lots of examples, lots of ways in, phrase the same thing in different ways. Make sure that make it entertaining as well. Make sure that you're keeping everyone on board, and that's what this process of criticism was about. And it was a great training for writing for a wide audience, which is something that I've moved on to doing, which I think is a very important thing for academics to do. So I spent about 10 years there doing this, and it was a good time. I very much believed in what the Open University was doing and is doing. I made some great friends there. Maria also got a job there at the time, and we lived in Milton Keynes. So I've lived in some of the most glamorous places in Britain, in Doncaster and in Milton Keynes. But I did at that time also get a position. The colleges to which I've been applying for a junior research fellowship needed a director of studies, and to look after their philosophy undergraduate. So I did that for a while at Robinson College. I was a member there for a while, and that was interesting too. Meeting some quite a wide range of people from different backgrounds who were all pretty committed to philosophy, and I always enjoyed teaching philosophy.
You're now at the University of Crete. What inspired you to move over there and join that university?
Well, I don't work. I don't have a full-time position with the University of Crete. I do a bit of teaching with them, but it's on a pro bono basis. I mean, I have an affiliation with them. We moved here essentially for family reasons. I won't go into the family's situation, but there are some caring needs in Maria's family. Maria was originally from here, from Crete, and we decided to move here to help with that. And we had 2 young children at the time, and we thought it would be nice for them to grow up here, close to their grandparents, their Greek grandparents, and Maria's brothers. At first, it was intended to be a temporary move, but then things got a bit complicated by the Greek crisis. We didn't want to leave at the height of that, and in many ways, things were working out reasonably well here for us. We were. So my position now is I'm on the periphery, as it were, of formal academia. I have affiliations with Sheffield. I'm an honorary professor there now, and I still regard Sheffield as my academic home. I'll be going back there next week, actually. I have an affiliation still with the Open University. I do some teaching here for the University of Crete. But I'm also operating as a freelance writing, increasingly writing. I say popular philosophy. I don't sure I like that term. Philosophy for a wide audience, which I'm increasingly feel is it's one of the most important things an academic can do. Yes, research is important. I think every academic should do some research, and everyone's got something important to say. But producing research simply for the sake of filling in one's CV is not something that I feel too excited by. I think communicating ideas, sharing good ideas, doing the sort of thing that Dennett does in his work, writing books that are aimed both at an academic audience and a popular audience, which academics can find stuff in and a general reader can find stuff in, and can engage in a conversation, if you like, that includes many different people from many different backgrounds. I think that's very, very important for academia. I think a conversation that includes only academics is, I don't want to be too cynical about this, but I think it can become detached from the context that makes it important. And you need intelligent lay people to engage with it, with academic work, and say and locate its relevance for people's lives. And now that's I'm quite ambivalent about popular philosophy. In many ways, I believe in it totally, as I just said. I'm wary of popular philosophy that is preaching to people, that is telling people, look, or popular psychology that says, here are the life hacks that I can teach you. And I think that a lot of that can actually be damaging. What the sort of philosophy I believe in, popular philosophy, is the sort that says, here are some ideas people have had that you may like to think about and scrutinize and assess and see if they work. Here they are. Let me show them to you and you see what you think. Philosophy should be a conversation. So I'm getting a little bit dogmatic here, I think. So maybe I should let you ask me another question.
No, that's all good. It's an interesting thing, this popular philosophy. Apart from Dennett, who else do you think's done this well and is doing this well at the moment?
My former colleague from the Open University, Nigel Warburton, I think has written some wonderful popular philosophy that does exactly this, that is designed not to tell people what to think, but to bring people into the academic, bring people into the world of philosophy, to introduce them to the debates that have been going on there for centuries, and show them how to engage with it and do it for themselves. He says, I don't think I'm misquoting him on this, that philosophy is not a spectator sport. You need to get involved, and he's providing, if you like, the training for people to get involved and do it for themselves. And I'm great admirer of the way he does this, and of the project itself. And of course, but there are many people doing similar things, and so it'd be invidious to just pick out one name. But I certainly admire everything Nigel has done.
Yeah, the show he runs with David Edmonds, Philosophy Bites, is brilliant.
Yes, indeed.
It's maybe the best
and
example.
It has, exactly, that's a great example of it. And it has something like 50 million downloads or something like that. And it's fascinating. It's really a reflection of the Open University ethos, I think, because it's high quality stuff. It's not dumbed down. It is you're getting the experts talking authoritatively about their subjects, but they're doing it in a way that communicates with a much wider audience. And I think it's that. I mean, Nigel is a sort of one-man Open University, I think, in many ways. He's a force of nature.
Yeah, it's really accessible. I think every episode's about 15 to 20 minutes. But as you say, it's for those 15, 20 minutes, it's not dumbed down and it's proper stuff. So, yeah. Anyone else? Do you like Alain de Botton? He's wrote a few books and he runs that organisation called the School of Life. Have you seen their videos, their books?
I'm afraid I don't know much about his work. I really should know more, and I'm afraid I don't. So I confess I haven't read his book, so I really can't say anything good or bad. I know he's had a lot of influence on many people, and anyone who gets people interested in philosophy is doing good work as far as I'm concerned. So, but I couldn't comment in detail, I'm afraid. I'm ashamed to say that.
Well, on this point of kind of getting people more involved, I did want to ask you about the podcast that you run now. You run this podcast called Mind Chat. You co-host it with the philosopher Philip Goff. I was going to ask you, how you decided to do this show and why you decided to do it. But was it for this reason to kind of get something out there in a nice format that people could enjoy a bit more? People who are interested in the subject and maybe don't know much about it. Was that the idea of the show?
Yes. We met in 2014. There was there was a cruise in Greenland that was organized by a Russian philosopher and businessman, and it was about consciousness, and I was lucky enough to be invited to take part in this, along with Daniel Dennett and Andy Clark and David Chalmers and many other leading philosophers of consciousness. And Philip was there too. And so we got to know each other during that trip. And we had very different views about consciousness, diametrically opposed, really. Philip is a firm believer in the existence of this distinctively phenomenal form of consciousness, the sort that is not explicable in physical terms. And he doesn't just believe that it's real, he believes that it is, in a sense, everywhere, that everything, every little fundamental particle has a bit of it. Whereas I think that this notion of phenomenal consciousness is not consciousness itself in the everyday sense, but phenomenal consciousness is what the philosophers talk about. I think it's a misguided notion and a misconceived notion, and I don't think it's anywhere, not even in our brains. So we couldn't really have more diametrically opposed views, but we kind of got on together. We had a similar sense of humor, and we enjoyed talking. And so 2 or 3 years ago, Philip was thinking of having a podcast, and I said, "Yeah, I've been thinking of doing something like that, because everybody's got a podcast, right?" And then I can't remember which of us suggested it, or whether someone else suggested it. Why don't you do it together, like the Odd Couple? And so we thought, why not do that? And we also thought that would give a nice, it would be a nice gimmick for the show. There would be a sort of the show for the podcast that would create a nice dynamic that should be interesting. Whoever the guest was, we could be coming at them from different sides. And also we thought it might be a nice example of people with very different views being respectful to each other and liking each other and handling their disagreements in a charitable and humorous way. And I think that's a good example generally, and also a good example in academia, where some disputes can be pretty bitter. So we decided to do it, and I think it's gone fairly well. We've certainly got a bunch of people who follow us and enjoy listening to us, and we enjoy doing it because we get to talk to some really interesting people. It's the time flies by doing these, for me at least, it flies by. We're talking to such interesting people that we can talk for 3 hours, and I hardly notice that time has gone. And I hope people enjoyed. I think perhaps we're not quite making it as accessible as we want to, but we're working on that. We're learning. We've done 2 series of it now, and we're planning the 3rd series, which is going to be very good, by the way. We've got some great guests. So we're going to work on on broadening the audience. We don't just want to talk to people who are already interested in philosophy of mind. And well, it's our little contribution to this project that I keep talking about, the project of widening the conversation.
It's brilliant. I really recommend anyone listening to it. It's a very fun show, accessible, and yeah, as you say, it is nice to see people with very different opinions kind of get along and talk about it in a friendly way. So I think you guys pull that off really well.
Well, yes, I think it's very important to do that because, I mean, provided the other person is in good faith and they're not motivated by some sort of some unpleasant kind of doctrine. If they're genuinely trying to work out the best view about something, and they've thought about it sincerely, and they're an honest player, as it were, then you've nothing to gain by refusing to engage with them. Engage with them, listen to them, talk to them. They might actually show you places where you are wrong. They might show you things that you've neglected, things that you need to reflect on. They might help you to see where you need to say more in defense of your view. At the very least, you'll get to understand their position better and to see why it attracts them and other people, and be in a better position to discuss it and say why you think yours is better. You've nothing to lose by engaging, and you've a lot to gain. And in most cases, I suppose the truth is somewhere between the extreme positions. It's unlikely that one person has got everything right. So that may be a bit. I often find with views that I disagree with, that nevertheless there are bits in them that are clearly right, and that I think, yeah, that's right. I need to acknowledge that, but I can do that. I can do it without giving up my position. But I'm going to need to modify it a bit to take account of that point. Is my position better? And in the end, it doesn't matter if it's my position or the other person's position that's right. That's not for me to decide or for them to decide. It's for the community to decide. It's for the future to decide. So we just do our best in presenting our position and put it out there. It's not good to get too personally involved, I think, with your position as a philosopher, because it can be quite stressful.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Well, it's a great show. I'll put a link in the description. Hope people can check it out. It'd be good just to touch on a little bit, some of your ideas. We were talking a minute ago about consciousness and the different way that you come at it from Philip. I mean, you're well known for laying out your ideas on your theory, which is illusionism. Could you just simply as possible kind of lay out what that idea is and what you're saying about consciousness with it?
Yeah, well, I should say that this is my position in the sense that it's one that I endorse, but it's not my position in the sense of one that I invented. I mean, it's essentially Dennett's position. What I did was I coined the name, although Dennett had already used the term illusion in many places. I just added an ism to it. But one thing I wanted to do actually with it was to try to. It's useful to have a name. It focuses people's attention on something. It's a useful way, a useful hook to get people into the debate. And I felt people had, although Dennett's work is widely respected and widely read, and he's one of the most influential, important philosophers of mind in the world, probably the most important. I felt his ideas on consciousness were often dismissed unfairly, and this upset me. I felt that people didn't understand what he was saying, and they misunderstood. They read very uncharitably, perhaps without realizing it, and dismissed his ideas. And I wanted to try in my little way to do something about that. So illusionism. People who haven't read much of what I've written or what Dennett's written think that I'm saying that consciousness is an illusion, that we're not really conscious. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we radically or at least many philosophers radically conceptualize consciousness. They have a bad theory of what consciousness is. They conceptualize consciousness as something like, and then we straight away we get into metaphor, something like an inner show or an inner light that is somehow created by the physical brain, but is not it's not the same as the physical brain. It's some extra feature of the brain beyond its physical features, something that you wouldn't find simply by examining its physical features, that a neuroscientist wouldn't find. It's some extra private world that is only available to the person themselves from the first person perspective. It's not visible from third person perspective. It's a private world, something like a private show, where all the properties that we ascribe to things around us in the world, colours and sounds and tastes and smells and so on, are presented in a private medium. There are private versions of these colours, and the colours that we take to be around us are actually, what we're actually immediately aware of are private mental colours, presented in a private mental world, the world of consciousness. And so it's what we're immediately aware of is this world of consciousness, and the world around us is something like an inference from that private mental world. So I'm caricaturing there, but I'm gesturing at the idea. So consciousness is like, the notion of an inner show, it's one that Dennett has used a lot, or an inner light, a sort of, are the lights on inside is a question that sometimes I ask with a fish. If you see a fish that's struggling in pain, or struggling after being injured, you can certainly see how it's reacting to the injuries that it has. But then it's tempting to say, yes, but is there an inner world there where the pain is actually presented to the consciousness of the fish or something? And it's very tempting to think that that's a question that you really can't settle by just studying fish or studying fish anatomy and fish brains. And I think that whole conception of consciousness very tempting, and it's gesturing at something. I'm not saying that it's doing nothing, but I think it's wrong. I don't think there is really this private world of consciousness. I think that is an illusion. But it doesn't mean we're not conscious. It means consciousness, when we talk about being conscious, having conscious experiences, doesn't involve that. I think it involves a much more direct kind of engagement with the world. When I'm conscious of things around me, that's not through the medium of being conscious of some private mental world in my head. No, I'm directly conscious of the things around me. I'm directly locked onto the colours and shapes and sounds of things around me. It's not filtered through some private inner medium of mental qualities. Because after all, then if it were, then we'd have the question of how am I related to that mental? If we think there's a problem as to how I experience the world around me, and that it has to be presented through a mental world, well, how am I aware of the mental world? Does that have to be presented through another mental world? It's not really solving anything. What I think it is doing, though, this talk about a private mental world, about phenomenal consciousness, I think it's gesturing at something about the nature of our psychology and the nature of our perceptual processes and the introspective access we have to them. I think it's gesturing at something. It's not based on nothing at all. But it's the, and I think this is the right word. It's like an illusion. Illusions are not based on nothing. If an optical illusion is not based on nothing. There's something there, some arrangement of shapes and colours and lines and whatever that creates a certain effect, say, of movement, where there isn't actually any movement. There's something there, but it's producing an impression in you that is misleading. That's what I think is happening with consciousness. There's certainly all kinds of stuff there, but it's producing an impression on us in the sense of disposing us to form a certain theory of what's happening that is wrong. Okay, so we are misled about our own, the nature of our own minds in that way. So that's essential. So it's the view that consciousness, in this specific philosophical sense, is illusory, is not real. But it's not the claim that we're not conscious, that we don't see and hear and feel and feel pain. I mean, it's a theory about what it is to see and hear and feel and be in pain.
There was two things you pointed to there that a lot of philosophers believe that you don't agree with. One was that there's not this inner movie playing inside their own heads. You think it's much more there's a direct observation, like interaction with the world. It's not that this movie inside the head. I understand that, but the other thing was that it's not privately observable. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I took privately observable to mean that. So we both, as you said, you do believe that people are actually conscious. If I'm conscious of an object in front of me, does it not just mean that for it to be privately observable, that I'm conscious of it in a way that you're not? It's private to me. You don't have that conscious experience. What was that part? I don't quite understand.
Okay, so we need to distinguish different senses of private. There's one sense in which I can perfectly happy to accept, indeed to emphasize, that you have your own take on the world. So if there's an object in front of you there, and then it's and you're looking at it from here, and I'm sitting over there and looking at it from a different perspective, we each have our own take on it. We each interacting with that object in a different way. Okay, and it's producing a different effects on each of us. Perhaps it's something that for you it's something you've never seen before, and you just notice. Say it's a little, a vase or something, and it's for you it's not something you've not seen before, and you just describe its shape and its colours and whatever. For me, perhaps it reminds me of, say, a vase that my grandmother had, and that it evokes all these different associations and memories and feelings in me. We've each got a different take on it, and in a sense that's private, because your take is yours and my take is mine, but we can communicate about it. I can describe my take on the thing. I can describe the feelings that it evokes in me and so on. I can describe the differences in how it might appear because of the lighting and so on. These things are not, they're private in the sense that they're happening one's happening in me and the other's happening in you, but that doesn't mean they're incommunicable, or indeed that there's anything about them that couldn't in principle be identified from the third person perspective, because after all these effects that the thing is having on you presumably all involve changes somehow in your nervous system. Okay, I'm assuming here that we don't have immaterial souls, so that all our mental processes are realized in processes in our nervous system. So your take on the object, all your complex reactions to the object, are realized in changes in your nervous system. They could, in principle, be observed with suitable equipment, in principle, I say, and perhaps decoded so that someone could say, "Oh, well, he's having this sort of particular reaction and that sort of reaction," so on, and you could confirm that with by telling us. So there's a subjective take in the sense that there's a take that is yours and a take that is mine, but there's nothing radically private about these. They don't involve anything happening in some separate mental world that is inaccessible to everyone else. It's not that your take on the object involves somehow the object being presented, being sort of an image of the object, if you like, being created in some world, in some private world of mental qualities. No one really believes in an inner show, but it's a metaphor. The idea is that the qualities of things in the world are somehow rendered in mental qualities, which we're immediately aware of. We're immediately aware of the mental, say, if the object is blue, say, we're aware of this mental blueness, the feel of the blueness, and only indirectly, we're directly aware of that, and only indirectly aware of the actual blueness of the object itself, the color that we ascribe to the surface of the object. Now, that would be radically private, because there is no way that a neuroscientist can penetrate into this private mental world of mental qualities. We can't see whether the private mental blueness that you experience when looking at a blue thing is the same as the mental blueness I experience when looking at a blue thing, because we can't get into each other's mental worlds and compare them. All we can do is provide descriptions. And when it comes down to it, what can you say about blueness other than that it's the thing that's produced, the experience that's produced by blue things. It bears these and these relations to other colors. It reminds me of this and this and this and so on. The actual essence of the mental color just escapes description. And it's this kind of privacy, the idea of something that's inaccessible in principle to anyone else, that I resist.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Does that?
Yeah.
So certainly there are things that are private. I mean, I'm thinking of a number right now. Okay, now you can't guess what that number is, but it doesn't mean that there's something there that there is a world that is utterly inaccessible to everyone else, which contains this number that I'm thinking of. If you could map my brain activity in sufficient detail, you could probably decode what number it was, because there's some physical changes involved in my thinking of that number that are distinctive of it being that number. It might even involve motor activity of my related to my actually saying the number. When I say it to myself in inner speech, there's certain sorts of activity in motor systems related to the activity that will be involved in saying it.
So anything you see or anything you imagine, there will be, although we maybe don't know how to do this yet, that there will be some evidence somewhere in the physical brain that would kind of point to something that you're looking at or something you're thinking of. There would be some evidence in there if we were to know where that was.
What else could there be? Because it's a reaction to things. Everything that my experience is simply a reaction to the world. Okay, and that reaction isn't happening magically without anything happening inside, any physical changes in me. Of course, and they're immensely complicated. There's 86 billion interconnected neurons, but it's changes in them that are constitute the change in my reaction to the world. If I see something that scares me, say, that I switch into a fear mode. All sorts of changes involved in that, and suddenly my attention becomes focused. All sorts of physiological changes happen. Maybe certain memories are caught up. I become prepared to react in certain way. All of this involves masses and masses of changes within my nervous system, and we just say, "Oh, he was afraid," and and as far as everyday social interaction goes, that's fine. We don't need to know any more detail, but there is a vast amount of more detail. And if you spelled all that detail out completely, you wouldn't have missed anything out. There wouldn't be some essence of fear, some private essence of fear that somehow was missed out of that picture. So my suggestion really is that we're taking an everyday way of talking about things, about what things are like and what experiences are like, which is perfectly good for everyday purposes, and thinking that it is pointing us to a reality that is purely mental, completely private, indescribable, and which can't be accounted for by neuroscience and the other sciences. And that's, I think, an error. That's an illusion.
Yeah, you're not saying it's fully, it's to some extent private, but certainly not fully private.
It's not private in the sense that it is only accessible from the first person perspective. The first person perspective itself is a part of, is a construction, if you like, within the shared public world. To have a perspective on things is to have a certain set of reactions to the world, which is itself part of that world. There aren't private mental worlds like the worlds of an immaterial soul that don't connect up fully, that aren't fully part of the shared public world. There's just one world, the public world. And here's a metaphor I sometimes like to use. Okay, so there's a river, which is the unfolding causal nexus of the processes of reality, and then there are little whirlpools in it where things reflect, the activity is tightly focused and winds back on itself, and those are minds and perspectives, but they're part of this larger causal flow. They're not separate from it, and the idea that they're separate from it is the illusion.
People that disagree with you on this, Philip Goff and David Chalmers, if you are to kind of try and sympathise with their position, what do you think, and what do you think the main thing they're missing that you believe is true is? What do you think tempts them to not see the picture the same as yourself?
Well, I think this is why I like to talk about illusion, because I think I don't think that it's so much that they're missing something as that they're trusting something that I don't trust. These intuitions we have, this picture of the mind that we have, and I understand why they have it, I think, because I'm kind of tempted by it myself. I can see why it's tempting to think of that mind, think of the mind in that way, as something that is not fully explicable in terms of physical processes, if you like, in terms of brain processes. It's tempting to think of the mind in that way. And the hunch that's behind a lot of this thinking is that you could imagine all of those brain processes occurring without the actual experience of consciousness itself, without the feeling, with the lights being off, as it were. And I can understand why they think that. It's a very tempting intuition. It's a tempting theory. And I think where the mistake is simply to trust it and to say, I can't see any other way of thinking about consciousness. That's, I think, the mistake. They accept a particular perspective. They cannot see that there is another. They're reluctant to see that there is another perspective. And therefore, I think reluctant to appreciate the advantages of that other perspective. So it's not, I don't think there are, you can convict them of particular errors of reasoning or of, it's not that they've reasoned badly, that they've overlooked things. It's that they have a too narrow a sense of the possibilities of the theoretical options. There's another way, there's another perspective from which you can look at this. They're located in one position, they're looking at the landscape from that position, and it looks like this to them, just as an optical illusion, when you look at it from one perspective, may look like something. And there's this wonderful example that Nicholas Humphrey has of the impossible triangle, the triangle that seems to bend back on itself in a way that an object couldn't in three-dimensional space. It's possible to make a physical object, a sort of ungainly construction of bits of wood at strange angles, which, if you look at it from just the right angle, looks like an impossible triangle. It looks like you're seeing an impossible object there in front of you in three-dimensional space, one that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. And I think that's a bit like, I think that's a wonderful metaphor. And I think that's how the people like Chalmers and Philip are looking at consciousness. They're looking at it from a particular angle where it looks to them, from that angle, that's the only way it could be. But to get over, I was going to say to get over that, but that's but to get over that, you'd need to move. You need to come and look at the same thing from a different perspective. And that, I think, is what Dennett offers in his work. It's not so much a tightly argued series of, it's not a tight series of arguments, although there are arguments in the book. It's more an invitation to look at the thing from another angle. But to do that, you've got to be willing to try it out. There's nothing in there that forces you to. It's an invitation, and you've got to be prepared to accept that invitation. Come and charitably and willingly take this view. And okay, maybe you take it and you don't like it, you still don't like it. Maybe you take it and you say, no, it still doesn't work for me as well as the other one did. Okay, fine. But do that first. Come and have a look at what we're offering before you reject it. I think that's what I would say to people. Open your minds to this possibility, rather than limiting yourself to the one that you're currently wrapped up with.
Yeah, and that people are used to. I guess this is something they haven't really, most people considered. Illusionism, it goes at odds with what your intuition would say. So it's good to at least consider it.
Yes, and I think that's one thing that the word illusionism has helped to do is to shake people up a little bit and alert them to the fact that, I am asking them to do something fairly radical. I'm not asking them to deny that consciousness exists, but I'm asking them to accept that they may be quite wrong about what consciousness is. And that's pretty radical. But just try it. There's nothing to lose. It's not as if trying to think of it this way will somehow stop you being conscious or stop you enjoying things. It's not going to have any. It's not going to change anything except your understanding of reality. And if it changes it in a way that fits better with the way things work, then that can only be an advantage.
Yeah, it maybe feels a bit similar to. It's not that you necessarily agree with this or that you have to, but some people who claim that free will doesn't exist, they often say that it feels that people who don't agree with them have this just natural resistance to not believe in it because they don't want to even think about that. And it maybe sounds a bit similar here, that people think, oh, I don't want to deny, in a sense, some aspect of my consciousness.
Yes, in the case of free will, I think there's a perfectly good sense in which we can say that free will does exist, though there are certainly senses in which we should deny that it exists. I have the sense that some people think that the people who are denying the existence of free will are somehow proposing that there are limits on their freedom. Look, you're as free as whatever philosophical theory of free will you have. You're as free as you always were. It's not that accepting this theory is going to somehow stop you being able to do anything that you were able to do before. You have all the freedom that you have, whatever that is. The question is, let's describe it accurately. Okay, so it's no question of this actually changing, making you less autonomous in some way. It's a matter of understanding the nature of the freedom that, of course, you're free. The question to ask somebody who's worried about freedom is, well, what sort of freedom do you want? What kind of freedom are you worried about not having? If it's so certainly there's some freedoms you don't have. They're not free to break the law, at least not without punishment. You're not free to fly unaided. There's all sorts of things you're not free to do. But what sort of freedom is it that you're worried about? And we have all the freedom that we think we have. The question is, what's the nature of that freedom? Is it compatible with, for instance, physics giving a completely, say if physics did, it's debatable that it doesn't, a completely deterministic picture of the way in which the world evolves? These are not questions about the extent of your freedom. They're questions about what your freedom involves. And I'd say the same about consciousness. Sometimes we have states of unconsciousness. We have states when we're sleeping and partially conscious. We have states when we're fully conscious, and we have conscious experiences. We have pains and pleasures and all sorts of things. Yes, no one denies that. The question is what's involved in having those things. And is it possible that we have a bad, or some of us at least have a bad picture of what is involved?
It's very interesting. We'll just move back though to final two questions, a little bit more broad about yourself, but that was fun to talk about. I wanted to ask, I noticed on your site that you have a few interesting different pieces. You have some limericks, some lyrics, spoken poetry, a quite hilarious page of funny definitions, which I recommend people they read. They're very funny. It strikes me you're very creative outside of your philosophy as well. I guess you enjoy doing these kind of things.
Well, thank you for exploring those bits of my website. I'm not sure how many people have done so, but thank you.
They're great, I should say. It's finding the definitions of the rest of it. It's brilliant, really. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
unexpected surprise.
I do like one or two of the definitions. Yes, it's something yeah, thank you. That's very kind of you. I am exploring doing a little bit of fiction writing with with philosophical themes. So this is something I want to do, and I do write poetry. I haven't published much of it. Well, I haven't published any of it, but I do write some, and I might do as I'm getting older. I'm trying to, I think, broaden out into areas that I've always wanted to explore, but felt that perhaps I didn't have the time, and that I needed to focus on more immediate things, and I couldn't indulge these other interests. And I think as I'm getting older, I'm thinking, well, if you're ever going to indulge them, you better get on with it. So, and there's perhaps less pressure now to publish career-oriented stuff. So I'm getting more opportunities to do the things that I want to do. But I see it as all part of a same thing, really. It's all about trying to understand what it is to be this strange thing, the self-aware living creature. It always amazes me that we just started talking about childhood, that by the age of 4, a child is aware of its own existence, can think of its own existence. It's only it was only born a few years ago, but there it is. I'll tell you another thing that I often say. I have this vivid experience of myself as probably only 4 or 5, that I could ask myself, what am I? I would say to myself, what am I? And it created a very, very strange sense of being dissociated somehow from my physical body, because the I didn't see. This is quite counter to the view of consciousness that I now advocate, that I was somehow separate from my physical body, a sort of dissociation, disembodiment, sense of disembodiment. And it amazes me that beings that have just a few years old have that level of sophistication to be able to reflect on their own existence and puzzle about it. I mean, as far as we know, we're the only creatures in the universe. We're almost certainly not the only creatures in the universe, but the only ones we know of that can do this. Maybe some apes can do a little bit of it. We don't only live, which is pretty remarkable itself, but we can reflect on our lives. And that's an amazing thing. Once you start doing it, it's the implications of it are huge. And I think everything I'm trying to do is it's sounding rather grandiose now, but it's all part of that exploration of what it is to be a self-aware creature, a self-aware living thing in this strangely contingent universe. I mean, apart from getting your daily bread and surviving, what more important thing could there be to do?
Yeah, interesting. So you commented it for all these different mediums, but ultimately for the
It
same
goes
goal.
back to that period, as I say, when I was exploring all sorts of different subjects and interests, and maybe some of them come back to the surface.
Yeah, very interesting. And the final question, Keith, is what plans do you have for the future with philosophy or otherwise, with work and writing and ideas? Any plans?
Well, I've got plans for a book on illusionism. I've been gathering material for it, and I want to get that get to work on that soon. I have another book that I have to write first. So I want to keep publishing academic stuff, but I do want, as we've just been talking I want to broaden out in different ways perhaps into writing some philosophical fiction, perhaps even into poetry. It seems bit arrogant to think that one can do these things. But for better or worse, I have a bit of experience now. I've done a lot of thinking, probably far too much thinking. So it seems that maybe it's time to try and harvest some of this and see if anyone finds it interesting. So I want to broaden out into more into having a wider conversation with people, and hoping that people find that interesting and want to respond.
I'm sure they will. Sorry, but yeah, best of luck with that and with the podcast as well. I'm looking forward to season 3 of that. And yeah, just thanks so much for your time, Keith. Great to speak to you today.
Thank you, Joe. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you enjoyed the Human Podcast, please consider subscribing. I hope to see you soon.